We're talking about the people that you could hire to be an assistant for you. That is a wonderful thing to have. I would recommend that when you break the $6 million in sales in 1 year period, it's time for you to get an assistant because you are so busy with other things, you need to let somebody else do some of the grunt work for you. Now, before you even get an assistant, you need to think about getting some software that would help you. If you haven't looked at topproducer.com, you need to do that. You may want to buy the salesperson version for yourself, or you may want to use their version that's available on the internet, or if you own an office, you may want to purchase the office version so that you can supply that to all of your agents, and then they would have an opportunity to use that same software as well. It does so many things for you, you may not need an assistant as soon as you think. Now, some of you are saying, but I don't run a computer that well. Then hire an assistant to run the software for you, and you'll be able to accomplish more things for you. What is it exactly that an assistant can do anyway? Well, one of the things they can do is they're allowed to hold an open house. So you could put an assistant there, and you could make sure that you're out doing something else, such as negotiating listings or negotiating contracts. They can even set up an appointment for you so that you could show a property. You may not be in the office, but a call comes in, a buyer wants to see one of your listings. Your assistant could set up an appointment for them to meet with you so you could show them the property. They can even put for sale signs in the yard of a property. And here's something you didn't expect to show up on this list. They can show a property. The assistant can say, well, come with me. Let's go take a look at the property. They're not going to talk about it. They're just going to let the buyers look at it. They're not going to negotiate. They're not going to quote the price. Every question the buyer asks, they're just going to have to refer the buyer back to the agent that the assistant is working for. And then the agent that has the license and does do the negotiation, they can take over from there. Well, that's kind of a nice thing for that to happen. Well, what kind of mistakes might we make when we hire an assistant? Some of the mistakes that are being made is that some of the assistants are being paid under the table, and there's no claiming going on with the IRS. If the IRS finds out this is happening, the assistant will be in trouble. Not only that, the agent that hired them is in trouble, and possibly even the broker that owns the company is in trouble as well. So let's pay them the right way. Consult with an attorney or a CPA and find out the proper way to structure this so that now you can do the withholding of taxes for the IRS and workman's compensation and some of the other things that many employees have to have. Another problem that many real estate agents have had with their assistants is they have allowed the assistant to practice real estate. They're not allowed to call out to a seller and try to set up an appointment to try to get a listing appointment for you unless they also have a real estate license. They're not allowed to negotiate contracts either. So that's going to be passed on to you. That's really why you hired an assistant anyway, so that you could do those kinds of things to bring in money more quickly. An assistant can easily be somebody that's going to be paying for themselves by the things they can free you up so you can do even more than you've done before. Well, what about working with other people in real estate? Now that you've got your real estate license and been in the business for a while, you need to realize who else you're working with. Inside that transaction you're involved with, there's a multitude of people that are also involved in it. Sure, you're the real estate agent, and maybe the other party has a real estate agent as well. But that's only part of the equation. The buyer has a loan officer. There is a title company that we're going to close at in most cases. There's usually a surveyor we're going to have to deal with. We also have to deal with the appraiser. We may have to deal with the home inspector, and sometimes he's also the termite inspector. We may have engineers. We may have repairmen. We may even have other agents that we're going to have to deal with throughout this transaction. Think of it this way. In that transaction you're involved in, you're the hub of the wheel. If you don't make sure all these other people that are involved in your transaction do their job, this thing will not close on time, and you'll wind up everybody blaming you as though it was your fault. You need to use loan officers that when they say they can do something on time, they can do it. Haven't you already had some loan officers that have come into your office? They promised you the moon, but underwriting wouldn't let them deliver? You don't want to use loan officers like that anymore. You want to use those that are professional in what they say and do. When it comes to title companies, you want to use a title company that you can work well with. But let's talk about the law one more time. The buyer gets to pick the title company, especially if it's a federally related loan. That means if it's Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, or it's FHA or VA, the buyer gets to choose. Now, if you work with buyers like I do, most of them don't know one title company from another. So when I hand them a list and say pick one, they usually wind up picking one of those off of the list, and then we go ahead and close there. Now, my most aggravating moment consistently in real estate is with surveyors. If I tell them the closing is on the 27th, they will walk into the title company at 8 o'clock on the 27th with that survey in their hand. I sure would like to get it early. What if it shows a problem? I would like to be able to negotiate that ahead of time. Some real estate agents lie to surveyors and tell them the closing is 3 weeks before it actually is. And then for 3 weeks, that surveyor is calling the agent saying, when am I going to get paid? When am I going to get paid? When are you going to close? If you ever get a surveyor that closes ahead of schedule, don't let anybody else know he's exist, or he'll get so busy he won't have time for your stuff anymore. Now, we've had a little bit of change in terms of appraisers these days. The lenders were favoring their own appraisers, and it has been decided that that could have been part of the problem when the economy went sour the way it did. And so now all the appraisers are in a basket, and they have to pull one out and assign it to the property itself. You may have your favorite appraiser. That's not really going to help you much in the new environment that we're in. In the home inspectors that you're going to work with, you call an inspector, they get out there, they inspect the property, and you want that done before the termination option period is over with, because most buyers do get a termination option. You not only want that home inspection report back, you want a homeowner's insurance agent out there as well, telling you how much the policy is going to be. Remember, if the seller has had 3 or more claims on their policy, the buyers are going to have a higher premium when they move in. And if the buyers have had 3 or more claims on their policy on a previous property, they may have a higher premium when they move in as well. It may make the price of the property so high on the monthly payment that the buyer doesn't want it anymore. You need to find that out before the end of the termination option. Now, engineers is something that you need to just collect a list along the way. You need to make sure and have that list, because when it comes up, you'll be glad that you already know some that are available. It is kind of hard to look for an engineer as you get into a problem. It would be nice to already have them online somehow or another. The same thing comes to repairmen. The roof needs fixing. Do you know a roofer? The foundation needs repair. Do you know somebody that does that? There's a plumbing problem. There's an electrical problem. There's a gas problem. You need to know people that are willing to work on those kinds of things. Now, one of the most frustrating moments you'll ever have in a transaction is when you're on one side of the transaction with a license and another agent on the other side is also involved in this transaction. And that other agent is not doing their job. Oh, you could call them up and you could chew them up one side and down the other and tell them how to do their job. Guess what you just did? You discourage them from ever wanting to show your listings again. Sometimes when that agent on the other side of the transaction drops the ball, you're just going to have to pick it up and you're going to have to run with it. In order to protect your part of the commission, you're going to have to make sure that that other agent knows exactly what they're supposed to do, or if they're not going to do what they're supposed to do, then second best is you do their work for them, just to make sure you're taking care of your client, and by taking care of your client, you're protecting your part of the commission as well. Let's look at general concepts to follow to try to survive in this business of real estate. We decide who to represent. Now, you always do that every time you go anywhere. When you go out on a listing appointment, you decide whether you want to take that listing or not. If the seller thinks the property is worth more than you could possibly sell it for, you walk away from that listing. If the seller is a cranky old soul and complains the whole time you're out there, you know if you take the listing, he'll complain about you next. So you don't have to represent that seller just because you had a listing appointment with them. The same thing applies with buyers. You do not have to turn a buyer into a client when you meet them. You can sell a property to a customer and make the same amount of money that you'd make if you sold it to a client. Or you can dump buyers and not work with them at all. Now, I would be cautious about dumping buyers, especially if you're basing your decision on how they're dressed and what they drive. Oh, there's one real estate office I'd love to take you to. It's a long, skinny office. And the broker has a policy, the longer you are with the company, the closer your desk is to the front of the building. So all the gray-haired people are up front and all the young people are in the back. Those old guys up front looked out the window one day and a fella pulled them up in a beat-up truck. They looked out there, and then when he opened the door, they noticed snuff cans and other things started falling out of the truck. The owner of that truck got out, and he had muddy old bib overalls on. The old guys in the front of the office said, "This guy's not going to buy anything. Let's give him to the new kid in the office." So they escorted him back to the new kid in the office. That new kid took that fellow out and had his first sale in real estate, a $3 million ranch. How did that happen? Well, it turned out the fellow that was in all those muddy clothes and driving that lousy truck owned a whole bunch of water systems. And he was too cheap to hire anybody else to fix the systems when they broke, so he'd been out fixing them himself. And now he wanted to spend the money, and he paid that $3 million in cash for that ranch. Those old guys up front are still kicking themselves for letting that one get away from them. In my own office, we were out on the porch one day, beautiful day, enjoying the sunshine. The phone hadn't been ringing, not many people had come in. And up drove a young couple in a Chevette. Do you remember Chevettes? That was one of the mistakes that Chevrolet made. It's sort of like the mistake that Ford made. They made a car they called Aspire. It's not a car now. It's aspiring to become a car someday. Oh, by the way, Chevrolet and Toyota are going to go together and they're going to build a car. They're going to call it the Toilette. Well, this young couple pulled up in the Chevette. I'm standing next to the duty agent of the day, and she says, "I'm not taking them anywhere. They couldn't possibly buy anything." I don't mind an agent thinking that on the inside, but saying it out loud wouldn't be bad either, but she said it out loud so that they heard it. I don't want people getting that kind of treatment when they come to my company, and that was enough for me on that agent. She had already been borderline on her income and borderline on her attitude in the office, and that was the last straw for me. When she came in the next day, I handed her a box with all of her things in it. And I said, "I've already mailed your license to Austin. You don't work here anymore." She says, "Why?" And I said, "I don't have to tell you why." And I sent her on out the door. I want people to get better treatment than that. When you look at somebody that drives the newest car and dressed the flashiest way, they're probably in hock to the hilt. But when you see somebody in a moderate car in moderate clothing, it may be somebody that's been a little bit more careful about how they handle their money. So you've heard all your life, don't judge a book by its cover. That is really true when you're deciding whether to represent a buyer or not. Now, of course, in order to do this representation, you need to let the people know already if you're representing somebody else. When the buyer walks into your office, they're asking about your company listing. They don't just walk in and say, "Show me properties." They have a specific property in mind because of an ad in the paper or the magazine or a sign in the front yard. So just let them know our company is representing the seller on that one. You have done the agency disclosure. When you're representing the buyer, if the seller happens to be home while you're showing their house, let them know you're representing the buyer. The listing agent should have warned that seller, be careful what you say to some of the agents that come in here, because they may not all be representing you. Another thing you need to do to stay out of trouble in real estate is you need to be consistent. If you tell somebody you're representing the seller, act like you're representing the seller. Don't deviate from that and turn into a salesperson and try to convince somebody that they need to buy a property. You just need to show them the property, ask them what they like, adjust what you're showing them based upon how they have reacted to the properties you've shown, and keep showing them until you help them find something.